There is a lot of lore hidden in the long dark, some of which is only recoverable when the lights turn back on. At the heart of Great Bear Island is a vast valley filled with open fields and surrounded by jagged mountains. The remote Pleasant Valley region, plagued by powerful storms and high winds, became the home to many islanders. In this first part of a two-part series, I will be exploring the buffer memories of the rural store in Thompson's Crossing and the operator of the store, Dan Presnell. In part 2, I will be exploring the buffer memories of the weather and radio station at Signal Hill and its operator, Sarah Eston. Before I continue, please make sure to comment, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so I can keep making these videos. Subject: Family Update. From Dan Presnell to Marie. Dear Marie, it was great to hear from you, and yes, I'm still on Great Bear. It's been a brutal early winter. We've had one road closure due to avalanches already, which in all my years here I can't remember ever coming this early. Farmers didn't even have time to get their hay in from the fields. The snow moved so quick. At least, I hope it's the weather. There are other stories floating around that aren't so easy to understand these days. Thankfully, the late autumn deliveries were decent enough this year, and the store is as stocked as I could hope at the moment. But there are some desperate people here in the valley. They don't talk to me very often about how things are going for them, but I can see it in their faces. Give my best to Greg and the little ones. Danny. From Dan Presnell to Jim Galveston. My last shipment from Better Food Vendors was incomplete. Although they are clearly listed on the invoice, I couldn't for the life of me locate any Pinnacle Peaches or Big Moose Kicks coffee in the pallet delivered to my shop. With winter coming soon, it's very important that I get these missing items delivered as soon as possible. We're a small community, but my stocks run out fast, with shipping already so bad. Fruit, not to mention coffee, is rare out here on Great Bear Island, but they might as well be staples to us. This might be hard to imagine, but we islanders have little by way of comforts, and these items are cherished. I hope you understand the predicament this error puts me in. If you could please look into this issue and let me know how we can clear it up, I would appreciate it very much. Regards, Dan Presnell. Subject: ATM removal. From Dan Presnell to service request. I am confirming disconnect of our single J735 model ATM at our store here on Great Bear Island. It's been more than a year and an empty ATM is about as useful as you can imagine. It's kind of a bad joke just letting it sit there empty these days, but I don't really mind. More to the point, it's your property, so please let me know if you have any other service trips planned to Great Bear this year. I could even truck it down to Milton if it would be easier to pick up there. Please update me on if this is possible or not, at your earliest convenience. Regards, Dan Presnell, customer number K35812. Subject: long time no chat. From Dan Presnell to Doug. Hey Doug, hope you're good. I wanted to ask you about old Tom Joplin. Do you remember him? He lives over on Skeeter's Ridge. He started saying some funny stuff the last couple weeks whenever he visits the store. He doesn't look well, but you know, we've never gotten along really well. Especially since Linda got sick. She knew him best from Milton. Does he have any other family on the island that you remember? I'd rather not head over there and check on him myself. He might not even see me if I did. It's not the same since you and Denise moved away. I guess I could get down to the mainland to visit more often. I think about leaving for good more and more. With no one left to talk me out of it, it's looking more likely than ever. But there's still the winter ahead, no matter what I decide. Just let me know about Joplin if you can, and remember brother, don't be a stranger. Danny. Subject: urgent, ongoing supply problems. From Dan Presnell to Jim Galveston. Mr. Galveston, forget the peaches and coffee, your man didn't even make it out here this month. When can I expect him? Do I have to remind you I pay in full and in advance for these shipments? I pay what I do because they are vital for our daily lives way out here. In the past, the money was enough to remind you of this fact, but times have changed, it looks like. I am available anytime. Please email me. Phones are unreliable out here. Dan Presnell. Dan Presnell is the operator and possibly the owner of the rural store. He is also, as far as I can tell, the only non-major character from the lore of the Long Dark that is in Wintermute. Well, at least he is supposed to be in Wintermute. Let me explain. When first encountering Father Thomas in Wintermute episode 3, you can question him about the survivors at the community center. He mentions that a majority of the people at the community center were the survivors of a plane crash. The rest were the half-dozen people still living in Thompson's Crossing at the time of the Quiet Apocalypse. Father Thomas also revealed that the townspeople had already spent days huddled together in the community center due to a blizzard that arrived a few days before the first flare. Therefore, the townspeople should still be at the community center. Dan's first buffer memory hints that all of these buffer memories were written just weeks before the first flare. The road closure due to an avalanche, which happened earlier in the year than expected, may be the same avalanche that occurred just weeks before the start of the Quiet Apocalypse. Dan mentions that there were stories floating around that weren't easy to understand. I believe that these stories are a reference to the rumors and sightings of the Forest Talkers and their strange activities. The Forest Talkers basically admitted to causing the avalanche at the exit to the highway in one of their collectible lore notes. The townspeople would actually blame it on a blizzard that had happened the same night in a different lore note. These notes and this first buffer memory line up pretty much perfectly. Therefore, Dan Presnell is supposed to be in Wintermute episode 3, but he isn't. There is no indicator of where he or any of the other townspeople went, but you can clearly see that the other people in the community center are Father Thomas and the crash survivors. Father Thomas's dialogue indicates they are supposed to be there, but they aren't. Additionally, this first buffer memory indicates that the valley farmers didn't even get a chance to get their hay out of the fields. This hay is something I forgot to account for in a previous lore video for the history of Pleasant Valley. To end this first buffer memory, it is written to a family member on the mainland named Marie. This first buffer memory sure had a lot of valuable information. The second buffer memory is written to a Jim Galveston, who is likely one of Dan's supply line links. The second buffer memory shows Dan's frustration in not being able to find the peaches and coffee that were supposed to be a part of their most recent supply shipment. It sounds like this was one of the last shipments before the winter and was vital for the valley. Here is where we see the value of coffee and peaches for the valley residents. Fruit is incredibly rare on the island, which may be the only official indicator that these trees at Molly's farmstead are not for fruit production. This was something that I had mentioned in the History of Pleasant Valley video. Now I believe that sap production is the only other possible use for these trees. Either way, coffee and peaches were treated like gold within Pleasant Valley, and possibly the whole island. The third buffer memory is about the rural store's ATM, which had been empty for a year. With inflation through the roof following the collapse, cash was pretty much worthless. According to the Orca gas station in Milton, the exchange rate for $1 Canadian was 23 US cents. That is compared to today's exchange rate of $1 Canadian to 74 US cents at the time of writing this script. This also doesn't account for the devaluing of the US dollar across global markets. It's insane that this ATM sat there for a year with nothing in it. I find it interesting that Dan offers to bring the ATM to Milton. Considering the first buffer memory references an avalanche, which I believe is the avalanche that occurred right before Wintermute, the only way to get the ATM to the coast would be through Milton. I've brought up this map a few times recently, which includes the extension of roads and railroads that we can speculate on from the lore. We know that both the Great Bear Highway and the Milton Road connect at some point in a place called the Interior Mountains. With the avalanche in Pleasant Valley blocking the shorter way to the highway, the Milton Road would be the only way around. This was also the case for the prison bus that was heading to Black Rock, which had to take the long way around through Milton. Dan offering to drop the ATM off at Milton makes sense. Also, the ATM would need to get to the highway so it can be shipped off the island. With no functional airfield on the island, the collapsed road to Field 29, and the devastated Trans-Island Railway line, the ATM can really only be sent back to the mainland via boat. The fourth buffer memory is about Tom Joplin, a character mentioned in Wintermute episode 3. Tom was a prepper that had various prepper caches across the valley. He was a resident of the Skeeter's Ridge settlement. It seems that after his disappearance, which was just before the first flare, the Forest Talkers discovered and conducted a series of raids targeting his bunkers. Astrid actually finds these prepper caches in the Joplin's bunker raid side quest. In the buffer memory, we see that Tom is exhibiting strange behavior. Since he is saying strange things and physically looks ill, I wouldn't be surprised if he was facing an age-related mental condition. It sounds like he is older. With no one to take care of him, Dan messaged his friend Doug, who might be his brother based on how he signs off at the end of the buffer memory. He wanted to find someone that knew Tom, including family. He mentioned someone named Linda who knew him from Milton, but she got sick. I don't know if this is an indicator that Linda passed away, but it's possible. It seems that Linda and Tom knew each other and he changed after her sickness. Dan also mentions his desire to go to the mainland. Not only did he want to visit more often to see Doug and another person named Denise, but he desired to actually leave the island. I'm not too sure if Denise is Doug's wife, Dan or Doug's sister, or a friend, but they both knew Dan from Thompson's Crossing. It seemed that Dan was running out of excuses and voices to tell him not to leave. He was ready to leave, but knew he had to wait for the winter to end. Assuming this was written just before the first flare, I wonder if he would have been better off if he had left for the mainland. It makes you wonder how choices like moving could alter your life greatly, especially in the wake of the quiet apocalypse. The final buffer memory for the rural store, but not the final one for Pleasant Valley, shows an incredibly distressed Dan contacting Jim Galveston once again. This time, it seems an entire shipment didn't even arrive. This buffer memory tells us that these shipments are monthly, but they certainly stop altogether for the winter months. This shipment, if these series of buffer memories were written shortly before the first flare, must have been the final one before winter kicked off into full gear. Dan was paying in advance and was expecting the money he paid to remind Jim that these supply shipments were vital to the islanders. The post-collapse reality had finally set in. The world had forever changed a long time ago, and Pleasant Valley was finally seeing all of the changes. I find it interesting that despite the Victory Garden present in Thompson's Crossing, which was supposed to symbolize independence from the mainland, the town also had a store that heavily relied on the mainland. I wonder if the political divide on the island split the residents of the valley, or if this was a case of a hybrid lifestyle. While playing the Long Dark, we, the player, can easily see there are alternatives to manufactured goods growing on the island, such as medicines, coffee, and canned goods. It's possible that these gardens grew things like potatoes and carrots, which we see with the Far Territory expansion. The town also had a farmer's market where the valley residents traded for the goods they acquired from nature. I think Thompson's Crossing and Pleasant Valley as a whole could have been an example of a harmony between the islanders relying on the mainland and the islanders relying on themselves. While some people would acquire their goods from nature, others would acquire the things that could only come from factories. Together, this would be the only way the valley residents could survive. Even if these buffer memories are older than I believe, it still shows us some of the same hardships shared by the other stores across the island, including Peter Good at the Orca gas station and Barbara Quincy at the Quonset garage. No matter how hard they tried, the post-collapse realities would eventually set in. Every set of buffer memories gives us unique perspectives into the post-collapse and even pre-collapse world. Dan at the rural store is no different. While this video ends, this is not the last set of buffer memories for Pleasant Valley. Sarah Eston at Signal Hill had her own unique set of memories, which I will share in part 2 of Memories of Pleasant Valley. If you want to catch up on any lore I've already covered, you can check out all the various playlists for the history of the Long Dark, Wintermute, Rudiger's Project, the people and places of Great Bear Island, and the buffer memories. They will be linked in the description. If you enjoyed this lore video for the Long Dark, please don't forget to comment, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so I can keep making them.